Good afternoon. It's Friday the 5th of July 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today with Ben Rubin. And by video link, we have Debi Evans and Cheryl Grainger. Well, it's a bit of a depressing day, isn't it? It is a bit of a depressing day because we have a new Prime Minister. The old one, well, I'm not going to torture you for too long. We've only got 14 seconds of his comments at the count, so let's have a listen to this.
The Labour Party has won this general election, and I have called Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him on his victory. Today, power will change hands in a peaceful and orderly manner, with goodwill on all sides.
Absolutely it will, because we've had a uniparty for the last lot of years. So the question is, will this make any difference? And of course, for anybody that thinks that by voting this way and getting rid of the Tory party in this way, because this seems to be the only motivation for most people has been just to get rid of the Tories and not worry about what Labour was actually going to do. The question is, what are we going to get with Keir Starmer? So let's bring him on screen. And of course, we're going to get the war agenda and we're going to get the World Economic Forum agenda, because sitting on his shoulders are Tony Blair and Klaus Schwab. That is, he made the statement, would he prefer Parliament or Davos? And Davos was the answer. And of course, Tony Blair's absolutely got his hand right up his jacket there or wherever. So, you know, what can we say about Keir Starmer? Many, many questions, as we've covered over the last number of months, about his career and so on, but no question where he is going to be taking us. So this is not a victory for socialism by any means, because he's not a socialist, and he's not any more than I am anyway. But of course, some people were celebrating, or one or two people were. Nigel Farage celebrating. The Reform Party, as we'll see in a second, got 4 seats. That's fewer than perhaps some people, including themselves, expected, but nonetheless, he was having a glass of wine. Well, who was commiserating? Well, Liz Truss, of course, hardly any surprise there. Penny Mordaunt, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Sorry, who's this?
Shapps.
Grant Shapps, yes. Sorry, the name has already fallen out of my skull. Yeah. So these guys, amongst the many who have fallen in the Tory party, what a shame. But what is a shame is that Andrew Bridgen did not succeed in winning his seat, nor did George Galloway. And the Telegraph decided that they would celebrate George Galloway in particular, not winning his seat, with a headline like "Goodbye Galloway." Goodbye Galloway. This is a triumph for Israel, and actually, this whole result is a triumph for Israel because Sunak absolutely behind the war policy in Israel and Gaza. As much behind the war policy in Ukraine, and undoubtedly he will be behind the war policy in just about every other part of the world that we decide to dip our toes as a country. But I thought that Telegraph headline summed up the situation reasonably well. On a light-hearted note, Anne McCluskey was at the count in Londonderry, and foil candidate Anne McCluskey arrives at the count centre, says the BBC, and they had to publish a photograph of her wearing a Defund the BBC t-shirt. So that was good. Now, Anne McCluskey did very, very well, because she ended up, although she didn't win the seat, obviously she ended up with 1,519 votes, which for an independent was an excellent result. If you get more than about 100 votes, you're doing pretty well. The question is then, where does this all leave us? Well, here is the graph showing where we are, with the Labour Party with 412 seats, Tories with 121, Lib Dems with 71, 9 SNP. The SNP got decimated, which is possibly the only good piece of news out of this whole thing. Sinn Féin did better than last time. Independents did reasonably well, and so on. So basically, what this shows is that if all the so-called opposition parties get together, they still won't have enough votes to even match the Labour Party by half. So that's quite an incredible situation for the Labour Party to be in. So let's put that back on screen for a second and have a look at what the turnout was, because this is also important. So 48,214,000 voters, registered voters in the UK, a 60% turnout, and that is down from 67.3% in 2019. And I think that's indicative of how people feel about this. Well, we called them clowns on the previous program. It has been a clown show. They are clowns. Nothing's going to change. And at least as far as Parliament is concerned. And in fact, the situation is worse because so many newcomers, so many first timers going into the House of Commons is going to take them 2 years even to work out what the heck's going on around them. But just to make a final point on this, if we look at the number of people that actually voted for Labour, out of that 48.2 million people, it was only 9.6 million people. So, in fact, Labour's vote didn't increase by very much. The combination of votes for the other parties being split and also people's determination not to vote at all, which has resulted in this result. And of course, this is going to then encourage the people that are working towards voter reform, sortition and these types of situations, because as people are disenchanted with the first past the post system, there are going to be inevitably calls for complete constitutional reform here.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a meltdown for the system. I think I don't think there's any redeeming qualities to this election at all. I think you're absolutely right that most of the drive towards Labour was basically driven by disgust for the Tories and actually dipping back into mainstream social media. I've been on Instagram this week a little bit, looking at what people I know on there have been sharing. I've tried to stay away for the past few months, and all of it was very much driven by not wanting the Tories in power. It had absolutely nothing to do with Starmer or any of the policy positions or anything at all.
So bearing in mind there's going to be no opposition at all in the House of Commons, since there are no decent independents there and so on. Reform, we've only got four members, and the question is how much opposition will be given to war policy, for example. Where's the opposition going to come from?
It's going to have to come from the population, I think. You know, like this is just going to be a block vote for whatever party leadership decides they want to do.
Yes. So basically, it's going to have to be street action that's opposing government policy. So we will see how that develops over the next period of time. But Debi, what is the situation then with the NHS as a result of this result?
Well, good question and good afternoon, everyone. And I mean, let's look at Labour, because their whole campaign message was change. And the change that I'm seeing is going to be an acceleration of everything that we haven't liked for the last 3 years. But who's at the top? So a lot of us talk about who's pulling Keir Starmer's strings. Well, the office of Gordon and Sarah Brown, we should take notice of that. And of course, Gordon Brown, he was made a member of the Order of Companions just recently by the King. He joins the company of Elton John, David Attenborough and Shirley Bassey. But he's been busy re-engineering the Constitution. So watch out for what's going to happen to the House of Lords and to the second chamber, which will become councils. So we're looking at 15-minute cities and mayors. But of course, let's not forget Tony Blair, who has been leading with ambition and optimism, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. But what do they have in mind for the NHS? And that's what I was going to actually have a look at. And that's what we look at next. The NHS refounded, delivering a health service. Well, what does that actually mean? So when you look into the document, because Tony Blair has got everything mapped out, we're looking at life sciences and we're looking at artificial intelligence. And as he says there, as presently constituted, the NHS cannot be the service we need now. And if you go further on into that paper, you can see that what he's looking for is a full national public health data infrastructure, which is going to bring all of your data under one roof and give anybody the right to look at it pretty much anywhere. He's also going to revamp NICE, integrated care boards, and he says going further and faster on devolution is therefore essential. Going on from that, we're looking at more partnerships, this time private voluntary partnerships. They're going to be raising money using social impact bonds, and I'll come back onto that in a second. They're also going to make sure that data is transparent for the broader public and for research and development of the British life sciences. sector. So once again, we've got all of this agenda and moving on. But one thing that I do want to mention, and I'll have to read it out because I'm not a financial expert, but as I understand it, a social impact bond, which is what they were just talking about then, is a pay for success new financial scheme, pay for benefit. So investors provide working capital upfront to NGOs depending upon their performance. So it looks like a nasty stranglehold to me. So perhaps we'll need to do more work. But as of yesterday, Wes Streeting was the shadow health secretary. So I just thought we'd have a little look. I don't know if he's going to be appointed as minister later today. We'll have to wait and find out. But who is he? Because he's definitely had his eyes on the top job for quite a long time. The Financial Times say that is he the saviour that Labour desperately needs? Well, he's been doing a lot of work in Israel, you might be interested to know. And on his trips to Israel, he's been looking at laboratories and he's been going to medical conferences. So a lot of work there on Israel. And while he was there, he was shown an app that apparently they if you have an accident, they can immediately transmit pictures of the accident or the victim straight to an A&E or a hospital. And they said that if you waited for an ambulance in Israel, you'd get one within 8 minutes. So Wes Streeting is obviously looking towards Israel for our health service to come. Now, the Financial Times went into Wes Streeting's personal history, of which he's been very open and honest about. But I just thought our viewers and listeners might like to know who Wes Streeting is. So his grandfather was an armed robber, and his grandmother, who was also ran foul of the law, shared a prison cell with the model Christine Keeler, who was in the 1960s Profumo scandal. I'm sure many of you will remember that. He's a devout Christian and he's a gay man, but he says that has caused him a lot of difficulty. If we go further on into the article again, you'll see that his two grandfathers, both were named Bill, and they were key figures in his life. But his maternal grandfather spent time in prison and was familiar with the craze, but apparently not part of the gang. And Wes Streeting thinks that, well, I don't know whether he thinks it's funny, but I don't. But he actually went to a prison before he went to a university. So going on, I think we've probably got a little bit more about him because his grandmother was embroiled in crimes and she was released from hospital to actually give birth to his mother at the Whittington Hospital. The Whittington's very close to Holloway. His mother was left wing and his grandmother joined picket lines at Wapping and threw stones at buses carrying scab workers to Rupert Murdoch's print works. So he chose not to be gay for many years, and he openly speaks about this. His partner, Joe Dancy, is a communications consultant. Now, he actually stood for Labour in this election, but he just missed out on the seat. I think it was in Stockton-on-Tees. And actually, Wes Streeting only just scraped in this time with a 500 majority. So it wasn't a landslide. But have a listen to a little bit of video of Wes Streeting talking about his background.
You know, and your parents weren't bad parents by any stretch of the imagination, but, you know, they were busy putting food on the table. They were busy, you know, keeping you alive. Teachers were really the kind of inspirational figures in your life, it seems.
Yeah, without a great state education, you know, I always joke I might have ended up in prison like my granddad rather than Parliament, although he's no longer with us and didn't live to see me elected to Parliament. I can almost hear him in my head saying, yeah, but you worked with more crooks than I did in Parliament. He was very cynical about politics and politicians. I mean, that's how bad politics has fallen, by the way. Even armed robbers look down their nose at us.
Perhaps words he'll come to regret. Anyway, considering he may be health secretary, let's see what he's got lined up for the country. And back in 2020, he wrote this paper online in an online launch event. he actually launched it. Sorry, that was a bit tongue-tied, wasn't it? But let's go on to the paper and see what the paper says, and let us face the future again. Now, this paper concentrates actually on pretty much every government department, but I was very interested to see what he was writing about health in particular. But he's very much on the climate change agenda, AI, etc. But on the health, he says that because we've become the fastest growing population in Europe, then by contrast, now we're looking at babies born will have, I think it's 1 in 3 chance of living to over 100. The over 65 population will increase to 15.4 million by 2030. So he's very much looking at the aging population. He's very much looking at meat-free meat to end the highly polluting dominance of the industrialized farming sector. So very much on the climate agenda, but also he seems to know Bill Gates quite well, and he seems to respect all of the technology that Mr. Gates has lined up for us. So what has Mr. Gates lined up for us? Well, he said back in 2020 that we would have robots. We can probably talk about that a bit in extra. He also said there was going to be ECG smartwatches, and we're going to have pills with microscopic cameras inside them so that we don't have to have colonoscopies or endoscopies. These are for gut conditions. We'll be able to see right through the gut, and custom cancer vaccines. And he's also mentioning a company called Selectis, which is a gene editing company. So lots of things ahead Mr. Streeting has planned for the NHS. But if you want to know more, he has not been backward in coming forward about his colourful background. And there's his book, Wes Streeting, 1 Boy, 2 Bills and a Fry-Up. And he says, actually, he's quite lucky to be here because his mum was going to have a termination, but changed her mind at the last minute. So more to come on Wes Streeting and his ambitions for the NHS. We'll see later today if he's appointed.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Okay, then let's continue with the electoral theme in a sense, but before we get onto the Labour Party, a quick review of the Climate Action Week, Ben.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to go into everything that happened at Climate Action Week because it was a huge event that ran for 7-8 days. But we're going to talk about the relationship between this event and the organisations behind it and Labour policy ultimately, right? We talked about the NHS. It's one of the big things that they touch on, but climate is absolutely front and centre in everything, as you've probably noticed. You don't have to be a viewer of the UK column to understand that. So Climate Action Week happened last week. Might get a piece on it. You can see here from the logo that it is very much focused on the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are the 17 segments of the 17 goals in the centre of the screen there, bang in the middle of the logo. It's backed by all the usual suspects, people that you would expect, and I'm going to come back to a few of these as we go through. And it's run by the organisation whose logo is at the top there. It's called E3G, which is run by this guy, Nick Maybe, who is former Blair, Downing Street, left there in 2005, 2006. So Blair very much in the mix here. Also, Lucy Yu, who I'm going to talk about more next week regarding her role at the Centre for Net Zero and Octopus Energy, who are right in the thick of this transition programme. She's also involved in 3CI and the Connected Places Catapult, as well as being an advisor to Tony Blair at the Institute for Global Change. And Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, who is actually a member of the Club of Rome, which is where a lot of this climate agenda has been being driven from right since the get-go, from the 1970s. And the Club of Rome essentially views overpopulation as being one of the most fundamental threats facing humanity. And they are constantly pushing this transition towards a renewable, sustainable energy system, and that sits right at the heart of Labour economic policies. We're going to hear now from from Keir Starmer himself.
You became an MP in 2015, and we're going to see some images from the last 14 years.
My energy bills have went up 3 times. I run about the house making sure that every plug has been switched off.
What's your solution to the energy cost of living crisis?
We will set up Great British Energy. This is a publicly owned energy company that will ensure that we have renewable energy, which is cheaper, so bills will be down permanently.
So this is Great British Energy. It's one of the main manifesto commitments made by the Labour Party. They talk about making Britain a clean energy superpower. They're going to set up this organisation. They say it's going to cut bills. I don't think that that's actually going to be the case. They talk about it in the context of independence from dictators like Putin, right? So the kind of national security, geopolitical dynamic to this is really important, particularly as we're going to see them trying to ram this through, right? This is going to be a big push to implement this new energy infrastructure. It talks about 650,000 new high-quality jobs. If this is a publicly owned entity, then that's basically that's like half of the NHS again on the public sector payroll. Like, this is a huge number of people they're looking to employ. And it's going to take a radical transformation of the country, ultimately, right? So it's not just about new jobs, it's about transforming physical infrastructure and bulldozing through planning legislation in particular, right? So Starmer was talking to Sky News recently and basically said that we didn't have to worry about implementing his plans because planning can be changed very, very quickly, right? So I think we should expect to see some things happening in the next few weeks even, which are going to transform the way that major infrastructure projects are approved and implemented.
But only approve major infrastructure projects.
Right.
Green infrastructure projects.
Well, exactly. Yes. So there's going to be a whole new bunch of legalese and terminology that's going to dictate what can and can't happen in the country. And I actually think that we're going to see the destruction of major parts of our cities. They're talking about building on the green belt. We've already seen, a lot of agricultural land put over to solar and wind farms, for example. The implications of this are absolutely huge. Yeah, it's all being driven out of a public-private marketplace. We talked about this one organisation earlier in the year, UK REEF, which is the Real Estate Investment and Infrastructure Forum, helping to build back better, right? So this is literally a World Economic Forum referencing organisation. And just this morning, they've expressed their excitement about working very closely with Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, building on the long relationship that they've already established since they were set up, working with Rachel Reeves, Angela Rayner, and a bunch of other people in the shadow cabinet, and who are now going to be running the country. Ultimately, or are they going to be running the country? Because actually, when you look behind the scenes, what sits behind it, it's global corporate, right? So this, again, this morning from Hul Ball, the UK managing partner of Ernst & Young, EY, the World Economic Forum strategic partner, big global consulting firm, crowing about the fact that he had Starmer in his office earlier on this year to talk about the enormous transformation programs and the big business, ultimately, the huge levels of global investment and, as I would understand that, asset stripping that are going to have to take place in order for this agenda to be rolled out. We also had a lady called Saya Gambari, who runs the UK consulting team at EY. She has about 1,300 people reporting into her. She was very excited about seeing Starmer at that event a few months ago. She's also been over in the UN, because obviously the UN are a client of EY, and she's super excited to be there, photographed wearing her UN jumper, essentially looking to implement UN policy in the UK and completely override the nation state, right? That's what we're looking at here. A lot of that's going to be driven by this woman, who's Kim Paikel, who is a Kiwi. She's from New Zealand, but she's here in London in the UK, talking about the extreme change that we need to go through. It's exciting to work at the intersection of innovation, sustainability, strategy, purpose, and technology with our clients. And she's not just running sustainability in the UK for EY. She's also an Imagine leader, and I spoke about Imagine about a month ago now, which is the organisation run by Paul Polman, who, amongst other things, is an SDG advocate, as well as being a trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation, where a lot of this stuff is formulated and handed down from, right? So you can see exactly how this is going from the top level right down into the front line of British politics. Talking of that, let's have a little listen to Georgia Gould, Mayor of Camden, talking about this new public-private partnership at Connected Places Catapult earlier this year.
I've just been talking about Free CI, which is a really exciting programme that brings together councils from around the country with finance that wants to invest into real climate projects in communities. So I was just talking about the scale of opportunity if we work together with finance, councils and communities to really get somewhere on net zero. My call for action would be to support real projects on the ground around net zero. There is so much that we need to do to retrofit our buildings, to invest in green space, to make our bold climate ambitions a reality on the ground. And councils are at the forefront of that, working alongside communities. So if there's technology or finance or ideas about how we can make this happen in places around the UK, please work with your local council.
So, public-private marketplace, dictionary definition of fascism. Georgia Gould best mates with Starmer. She's actually Mayor of Camden. His constituency is in Camden. They're always hanging around together. The 3CI, the organisation she just described, is actually working with Apolitical Foundation, who I spoke about last week. And this was literally announced this morning, so we can see how all these things are coming together and how they're going to ram it through democratic innovation, like we talked about. And let's hear from Claudia Chalice, the founder of Democracy Next.
How could we change the way in which decisions related to housing and infrastructure, mobility get taken every time they have to be taken? And so we did this work because we see these sorts of issues are the same all over the world. Before we launched this, we did interviews with people in different countries, those different roles. Actually, we spoke to some of your colleagues in Camden even, I remember at that stage. And there's just a shared sense of these problems being shared in cities around the world. And we really believe that we don't just need different policy solutions to these issues that we're facing all over the place. We really need a different way in which we're taking these decisions on an ongoing basis. And these new governance models can help break through deadlocks and give legitimacy to the sometimes hard choices that need to be made that require trade-offs.
So they're going to use these democratic innovation techniques to break through situations where trade-offs need to be made and people just have to do what they're told by the state. Yeah, like this is extraordinary stuff that we're looking at. And we're going to hear about this much more as the months go on, including next week, because the Future Great Britain event is happening and obviously net zero is front and centre on the agenda there.
Okay, Ben, thank you for that. Now, if you like what the UK column does, you would like to support us, we do need your support. £5 a month, we'll pick up a membership. You get access to extra and the forums and so on. So support.ukcolumn.org is the place to go to find out about that. Please do share our material. This is really important as well in this current time of censorship. We're already off Facebook now, we mentioned that again. So we need our membership to be the algorithm, if you like, and share our material and beat the grey blacklisting and grey listing and so on. You could pick something up at the UK column shop. And please remember that we're asking all our members to grab a copy of Agenda 21, Your Life in Their Hands. And if you think that you know everything about Agenda 21, well, maybe there are people that you know that don't know. So maybe you'd like to pick up a copy and give it to them instead. Now, Gutsy Women, Sandy Adams was out I think yesterday. That is now on the UK column website. Sorry, that was on Tuesday that went out, but the on-demand version is on the website now. Then Dr. Ursula Edgington talking about the situation in New Zealand with Debi is also on the website, and also Brian's interview with second interview with J. Michael Waller is up on the website now as well. If you haven't seen any of those, please have a look and share them. Debi's latest blog will be up later today. Sorry for the delay on that, but that'll be up later today, and share that one too. Now, a reminder of the date for your diary, which is Saturday the 19th of October at a venue in Bristol. We will be hosting a live event there with quite a number of really interesting speakers. So do get along to that. If you can, keep that date in your diary. More details coming soon. And the second volume of the Pfizer papers is now available. Now, apparently this is going to be sold on Amazon in the UK. This time round, the first volume was not available in the UK, but this will be. So if you'd like to pick that up, you could get a copy. It's available for pre-order now at Amazon. And a reminder of the question here is, do you trust your local council? And the answer, of course, is no. But this event is asking or at least giving people the opportunity to get informed. So join the Rally for Insanity on Sunday, the 7th of July at 2 p.m. at the Guildhall. That's at Bath Nest Council, so it's in Bath. So join those people for that if you possibly can. Now, a piece of news for everybody. The name David Halpern has been mentioned many, many times on this programme, and it now seems that he has decided to leave the nudge unit, so he's now outside the nudge unit. This is the statement that they made. David Halpern, the founding director and president of the Behavioural Insights team, will be moving on from his role and the team from July the 31st, 2024. It's a big moment for the team. David has led BIT from its inception in 10 Downing Street in 2010 through its growth and transition to a 250-person social purpose company that has conducted work in more than 75 countries across the world. He leaves the team with the most extensive forward work programme it has ever had. We're pleased to announce that David will retain a connection to the team as President Emeritus. There you go. And will continue to have close links with the team in areas of joint interest. And of course, we should also remember that this is the same David Halpern that was a member of the SPI-B SAGE subcommittee on exploiting fear, or well, on behavioural science. This was the group which decided that the media needed to increase a sense of personal threat in March 2020 to make sure that everybody followed the lockdown policy and got their vaccinations once it became available. Let's just get a quick quote here from SPI-B. They said at the time, a substantial number of people still do not feel sufficiently personally threatened. The perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased amongst those who are complacent using hard-hitting emotional messaging. Social disapproval from one's community can play an important role in preventing antisocial behaviour or discouraging failure to enact pro-social behaviour. This is very Maoist in nature, and they weren't only using these types of behavioral psychology on people, but they were also spying on people quite a lot. So they were talking about, so this is March 2021, a year later, behavioral considerations for vaccine update in phase 2 and beyond, and talking about using cell phone mobility data to watch how people were moving around the population and comparing how far people were moving from their home base, whether between vaccinated and unvaccinated people, and whether they were attending vaccination centres and so on. But don't worry, because it was all happening in an anonymised and aggregated GDPR compliant manner, so no need to worry at all. So anyway, we look to see what Halpern moves on to with interest, and well, maybe that'll give us a clue as to what's coming next. Debbie, let's move on then to vaccinations in pregnancy.
David Halpern's going to be very busy at the Fleming Initiative, remember, rolling out the new behavioural PSYOP for antimicrobial resistance, but maybe that's for another news. So yeah, last week we were talking about the whooping cough vaccine for pregnant women. And we know that the NHS are trying to promote pregnant women to have this injection between 16 and 32 weeks. So I wanted to explore vaccinations in pregnancy, and our very good friend Cheryl Grainger has very kindly joined us to explain a bit more. So Cheryl, I'm going to hand over to you now to explain what you know about vaccination in pregnancy.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Debbie. I suppose the first question to ask is, do you actually know too much about vaccines yourselves? The ones that you've had, the ones that your children have had, the ones that pregnant ladies are going to be having. I'd like to just show you what's happened over the last kind of 100 years. We've actually got a decline in all diseases. There were deaths a long time ago. Very few people are in that position of being threatened by these conditions now. So the one that we're going to mention, or Debbie's just mentioned, is whooping cough, which goes by the fancy name pertussis. When the vaccines came in for a lot of these known childhood conditions, they actually had a decline, a very steep decline of people who were actually threatened by those conditions. So kind of bear that in mind. The other thing to point out that everything is related back to what happens in the States. So in the States in 1986, we got Congress passing the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, the PrEP Act. And that happened because the manufacturers stated that they could not afford to continue compensating for the excessive amount of injuries and deaths caused by their product. So what did the government do? They made it that they got complete immunity was awarded to them. And then that's when the childhood schedule took off. And that's why they're very keen to get products, vaccine products, licensed for children. So the result of that was, what were the safety studies like? What were they actually looking at in the safety studies? Can we go back one? Yeah. So here we can see there's a whole schedule. Looks like a very busy thing. But on the right-hand side, you've got a yes or no as to whether these studies, these vaccine studies, actually had a placebo control. And most of them, as you got newer vaccines coming out, always had the control as the previous vaccine, which hadn't had a safety study done on it. So that's something to point out. The other thing to point out is the other things that could have been compared with it. So in some instances, like chickenpox, that was compared as a control with neomycin, which is an antibiotic, and something like Hep A and Gardasil, that had the aluminium adjuvant actually in the control group. And that means that they were actually putting into the control group a substance that can be damaging to the body. So moving on, just to look at the drugs that have been used. So let's look at Pfizer's top-selling 5 drugs. You can see there the normal safety review period for a normal ethical medicine is actually quite a number of years. But when we get to their third best-selling drug, which is the pneumococcal vaccine, then you can see there it was only looked at for half a year. And it was actually controlled against the previous pneumococcal vaccine. And again, if we look at a whole list of vaccines on the right-hand side there, you can see that some of them, the safety review period was a few days, which seems absolutely ridiculous in terms of looking at any safety issues that related to these vaccines. So what we're talking about vaccines and the effect that they have on children in particular. And I'd like to point some points out about children and vaccines, children's immunity systems, because if you're giving a pregnant woman a vaccine that'll affect a fetus or a baby, then when that baby's born, there could be effects. So let me make you aware of the fact that critical development of the human brain actually is very important up to the age of about 3 years old. And any acute inflammation that the body undergoes is basically linked to inflammation. The immune system is not developed enough to receive a vaccine at this stage, and therefore you're not going to start developing immunity to anything given until the age of 2. But obviously there can be very serious effects from that inflammation that's created by those preparations that you're given. So that's why you must give more than one vaccination in childhood for a lot of these vaccines, because you don't get the effect that you want, the immunity effect, and therefore you have to repeat it. You might get other effects, you might get side effects, but you're not getting the immune effects. And therefore, if you have a chance, it's probably best to push any vaccines that you feel that you might get a benefit from into at a later age group, if you possibly can. So Debbie wanted to say a few words.
Cheryl, I know we're going to go on to the UKHSA, and I know you've got a comment to make about the UKHSA in a second, so I'm going to go back to you for that. But I want to highlight, to go back to the whooping cough vaccine, because you've highlighted about general vaccines. Last week, we talked about the whooping cough vaccine. And if pregnant mums out there are considering having this whooping cough vaccine, I'd like to ask them what they think they're having, because most people that I've spoken to, if I've said a whooping cough vaccine, they expect to get that, right? However, they would be wrong. If we look at the prenatal pertussis vaccine change letter that was written by the UK HSA, you'll see that they're using Adacil. That's the vaccine they're using, which is made by Sanofi. Let's not forget Professor Graham Cook at the MHRA. One of his revolving doors is Sanofi. But this Adacil, it's not just, if we could just go back a slide very quickly, because I just want to show you that it's not just a vaccine for whooping cough. It's actually a combination of tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, which is whooping cough, and non-inactivated polio. So ladies, you're not just getting one solution for whooping cough, you're getting a lot more. It also recommends that you have the injection between 16 and 20 weeks, but you can have it up to 32 weeks. So I went and had a look at the manufacturer's instructions and at the FDA. And when I looked at the FDA, I found out that they were recommending that this immunisation should not take place until the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, which is in direct conflict with what the UK HSA is saying between 16 and 32 weeks. Clearly, the FDA are saying 3rd trimester, which is 28 weeks. A pregnancy is 40 weeks duration, right? So from 28 weeks. It also says with regards to lactation that it is not known whether Adacil vaccine components are excreted in human milk. Data are not available to assess the effects of administration of Adacil on breastfed infants or on milk. I'm wondering whether pregnant women are being informed of this at all. It'd be interesting to hear from some of them. It also says it's not approved for individuals less than 10 years of age. So those are the facts when it comes to Adacil. But I think my final question has got to be back to Cheryl for just the last segment, really, is what is your message to women who are pregnant who may be considering having a vaccination, Cheryl?
Yeah, well, if you've got this relationship with your baby, then you protect them, because anything around them, any bugs around them, you are making antibodies to, and you will actually pass on antibodies to them through breastfeeding. And therefore that kind of questions whether you need any vaccines. So what we should be asking is what can we inject you with? Should be replaced by how can we support the child's immune system to work effectively? And that is very important, especially in the pregnant mum and especially in the child. And you might like to know that the UK HSA has been basically looking at a surveillance programme on the safety of certain vaccines by looking at people who've been given vaccines inadvertently during pregnancy or shortly before conception. So that's what they base their safety information on, whether you've been given something by mistake and therefore whether you get a bad reaction to it.
Cheryl, thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure there'll be much more on this topic in the very near future.
Okay, thank you, Debbie and Cheryl. Now, I just want to put this graphic back on screen again and just clarify something there, because Cheryl was making the point that if you look at the right-hand side of each of those graphs, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see where the vaccines were introduced, and you'll see, as Cheryl was making the point, that the effectively the diseases had been beaten already before the vaccines are introduced. And the point I wanted to make was that what we tend to see, the graphs, the versions of these graphs that we tend to see published are just showing the very right-hand side of that, where of course where the disease were already beaten, and just going to draw a parallel there to what happens with climate science as well, where they tend to only show very few number of years, implying therefore that we have this massive rise in temperature, when in fact if we extend the graph over a couple of thousand years, several thousand years into the past, we don't see the same trends. So the graphs that Cheryl was showing there were showing a bit more detail that we tend to get from the publications that we normally see. So anyway, I want to mention this article. It's on the UK Column website. It's entitled COVID-19 Vaccination Mechanisms of Neurodegenerative Disease. This is from Dr. Mike Williams. So just keep that on screen there for a second. I mean, what this is talking about is the fact that early experiments have been linking spike protein to neurodegenerative disease. One study showed that spike protein has caused other proteins to fold, producing what are described as amyloid-like proteins, and that most misfolded proteins cause severe and fatal neurodegenerative diseases like dementia. At least they look like dementia. The latest study highlighted in this article demonstrates that the incidence of dementia and its precursor MCI increased significantly in the mRNA vaccinated. It's talking about an early paper suggesting that prion proteins, which are proteins that cause other proteins to fold and cause lethal diseases like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, may be formed as a result of genetic changes in the spike protein in the mRNA vaccines, and that prions are a subcategory of amyloid proteins. It goes on to say then that even if we accept the need for the elderly to be vaccinated, and of course many people don't, I think including us, one has to ask the question, why, in the face of all the evidence against the need to continue vaccination and no need for normal healthy people and young people to be vaccinated, do they keep on attempting to force vaccination on everybody? And Dr. Mike Williams here asking if we unnecessarily create dementia in older people, does that set up a need to euthanize, as we already see a global push to increase assisted death? I think these are very good points, and I would like to just encourage anybody that hasn't seen that article to read it and share it if you possibly can. And just quickly mention this one as well. This is in the Daily Skeptic. This is entitled "The Devastating Charge Sheet Against Pfizer." This is by Dr. Carl Hennigan, and he's going through all the various points about Pfizer and the Pfizer mRNA jabs and so on. I just wanted to take the opportunity, since that article's been published in the last few days, to remind everybody about the UK Situation Rule, which is a list of all the Pfizer Moderna documents and their analysis in short analysis of each, with links to the full analysis reports that are available for those. So do have a look at all of that information if you possibly can. Now, let's move on then.
Racial politics.
Yes.
Yeah, just the trivial issues on a Friday on UK column. I'm going to start by posing a question to our Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters here in the UK, which is, who is leading you? Where are they taking you? What methods are they using to take you there? And at what cost to your community and to British society more broadly? Right, so this is building on a report that Charles did on Wednesday, absolutely staggering video and report that's been issued from the Church of England talking about racial justice. And to me, this is really using neo-Marxist ideologies to manipulate your way into positions of power and authority, and to basically take over traditional institutions like the church, right? This is really not good stuff, and I'll get into exactly why in a moment. But it's not just happening in the church, it's happening everywhere else too. It's happening in the markets, it's happening in the state, and the organisation I've been following for quite some time that I'm going to talk about today is this one, Black Equity Organisation. So this was founded in 2020 on the back of the BLM movement and the huge outpouring of rage and violence that was triggered by the death of George Floyd over in the US. It's very high profile and well backed. You can actually see the probably future Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, on the bottom left-hand side of the screen there, right? So there's a lot of very high-profile figures involved in this. And the terminology is incredibly important, right? I'm going to read this out because this is really the crucial point. It's Black Equity Organisation. Equity and equality. What's the difference between those two things? Equality means every person, group of people, or segment of society gets the same opportunities, resources, and support. Now, I think that's what we should be aiming for. But equity goes further. People with different circumstances, those who have been historically marginalised and oppressed, for example, receive varying levels of opportunities and support so they are able to reach an outcome equal to others. It levels things up. Both concepts are essentially about fairness, but while equality sees everyone treated the same, equity achieves this by taking into account people's different starting points.
So this is positive discrimination, in other words? Is that the right way to look at it?
I just call it Marxism, right? Is it communism? Yeah, because in order to enforce equity, you have to have a totalitarian state, yeah, who are deeply involved in every single part of your life. Right? There's no other way to administer this, yeah? And they talk about dismantling obstacles, getting everyone to the same starting point and ensuring that people have what they need to achieve a balanced outcome, right? So this is about equality of outcomes. Yeah, it's not about equality. This is about artificially reordering the system in order to put certain people in positions that they wouldn't have been in if we just left it alone, right? And on the face of it, that sounds like a good thing to do, but actually where this leads to is extremely bad, right? It's a really, really, really bad place. And actually, these ideas of social justice and racial justice are the same ones that informed regimes like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. I've shown this image before. I've been in that room. It's the S-21 torture chamber in Phnom Penh. And that action, what happened to that individual on that bed there, happened to nearly 2 million other people in Cambodia, actually. There was an enormous genocide that took place of their own citizens based on the principles of equity and social justice. Yeah, it's one of the reasons, actually, why I do the work that I do and that I sit here on UK Court and talking about this stuff, because I know how bad these things can get if we allow them to get as progressed as they potentially can do, and they are actually right at the heart of the cultural debate and the political debate here in the UK today, right? This is absolutely live right now, and it's an extraordinarily dangerous situation that I see us moving into. So back to BEO, they're extremely political. They've been working with Operation Black Vote to help get out the vote in the general election. Operation Black Vote was established by Lord Woolley of Romford, who I've spoken about a lot in the past. This is a still from a video that he made with Mariana Spring, promoting COVID vaccines to people of colour, as they like to call it. Right, so you really got to question his judgment and the judgment of his organisation and the methods used by him and that organisation, regardless of race. It's got absolutely nothing to do with his skin colour or his racial background. Right, this is to do what he's done and these organisations have done and are doing and are going to do in the future if we allow this stuff to continue. Let's have another look at the mission of black equity organisations. So they exist to promote economic, legal, social and political equity. And at the bottom there, we can see we are here to be a powerful advocate for black people in the UK and work towards the dismantling of systemic racism in our society. Elsewhere on the site, it goes on to say that BEO is here to help society wipe out racist views, which is difficult to take seriously, actually, from an organisation who positions itself as being for one race. Yeah, if you're for one race, then you have to be racist in some sense. It's ridiculous to suggest otherwise. They also say here, a bit further down, that BEO is serious about hard facts, which is great, because we're serious about hard facts too. It's what UK Column is all about. Systemic racism, which is a really important term that gets used a lot, and we heard it a lot in 2020 in particular, and people were being asked to come out and make big statements about it and how we were going to change ourselves and society in order to address it. But what it actually means is policies and practices that exist throughout a society that result in and support a continued unfair advantage to some people and unfair or harmful treatment of others based on race. Right? It's a very clear definition. Now, we don't live in a systemically racist society in this country. There are no laws, no policies or practices that support an unfair advantage to people based on their race. They don't exist. And actually, we've done more than almost any other nation on earth over the past several decades to make that so. Yeah, I think that we stand out, actually, as a society in addressing racial issues. I don't think systemic racism exists in this country at all. And actually the best hard facts, the best evidence to support that is looking at the board of Black Equity Organisation. And we can see here, Dame Vivian Hunt, DBE, Karen Blackett, OBE, Kwame Quay, OBE, David Olusoga, OBE, Marcia Willis-Stewart, KC, King's Counsel, she's a barrister. If we lived in a society where people were prevented from progressing to the upper levels because of their race, then none of these people would exist. They wouldn't have OBEs. They wouldn't be KCs. Yeah, so this is completely ridiculous when you actually examine the hard facts. Yeah, you're telling us systemic racism is an issue, but when we look at your organisation and we look at your backgrounds, we can see that it isn't. Yeah. So what's the agenda at play here? Well, we know what it is. It's the same agenda that we talk about all the time. It's about progressing a global corporate agenda, because Dame Vivian Hunt, who was actually one of the founders of BEO, is also the Chief Innovation Officer at United Health Group. Yeah, so top level corporate people, right? She's probably earning over $1 million a year, I would imagine, in a position like that. It's one of the biggest companies in the United States, and healthcare is the richest sector in the United States. And before that, she was the senior partner for McKinsey and Company in the UK. She ran McKinsey in the UK, right? The World Economic Forum strategic partner. Who else have we got in here? Karen Blackett, OBE. So she was the former UK MD of WPP, the big global advertising network, whose chief executive, Mark Reed, is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. She's also very active around the court, so she gets invited to things at the palace. She's also a freeman or free sister woman of the City of London. Yeah, so again, doesn't appear to be any barriers to progress going on here. And she's also really close friends with this woman, Joan Sarpong, also OBE, who I'm going to talk about now. Joan Sarpong is fascinating because, again, she sits right in the midst of this racial justice, transformation of society narrative that we're constantly being pushed. But where's that coming from, right? And what's her background and what's she all about? Well, first of all, she's a member of Imagine, the same group that I talked about earlier. So she works with Paul Polman, who is a trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the top SDG advocates working at the UN. She also recently hosted the EY Entrepreneur of the Year Award, working directly with Carmine DeCibio, the outgoing CEO and chair of EY. EY, again, World Economic Forum strategic partner, and Carmine DeCibio actually being on the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, which is Linda Rothschild's philanthropic group. Joan Sarpong is standing alongside him, being paid to help them deliver their event. There she is at the launch of the Earthshot Prize with Michael Bloomberg. Prince William was also there. You can see the social connections. And there she is hanging around with Mark Carney. Look how much fun they're having. He's the president of Chatham House. He's on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. He's the chair of the G30 group of central bankers who oversee the Bank of International Settlements. He's the top central banker in the world. And apparently they're tight friends, yeah? Good old friends. So again, where are the barriers to progress? What else has she been doing? Obviously, she's into the left-wing political thing. She's hanging around a couple of days ago with Meti Choban from My Life, My Say. I don't have time to go through all of the logos on the left, that you can see them right there. And of course, that means she's a big supporter of the Labour Party because change. Yeah, we all want change. Yeah, let's have a little listen to her speaking now.
There's a video, Stephanie, if we could.
It's June here, and today is National Voter Registration Day, the last day you can register to vote for the upcoming general election. If you give an X about your future, vote, because it's time for change.
So, black people, be careful who you let speak on your behalf.
Okay, thank you, Ben. We're just going to end then with NATO. Next week is the NATO summit. We've been waiting for this all year, at least NATO has, because this is a key event for them. Just so we understand what this is about, let's just have a little bit of video of them promoting this.
Gearing up for the NATO summit next week. The Secretary-General has met world leaders, including President Biden, Prime Minister Trudeau, President Macron, Prime Minister Callas, President Zelensky, and President Pellegrini. While in North America, Mr. Stoltenberg met with parliamentarians, think tanks, and the media, and released NATO's latest defense spending figures, which show an upward trajectory of defense spending across the alliance. In 2024, a record 23 allies are spending 2% of their GDP on defense.
More and more allies are now really stepping up and investing more in our security.
Next week, we'll be back in Washington, D.C. for the NATO summit, celebrating 75 years of the most successful alliance in history.
So that's really impressive, isn't it? I mean, we should all be celebrating 75 years of NATO, shouldn't we? And certainly that video sums it up. So this will be Jens Stoltenberg's final NATO summit before he leaves, to be replaced by Mark Rutte. Well, we'll see where that goes. But what can we say? We're looking forward to it. We'll see what happens. Zelensky undoubtedly will be there, and this is going to be mainly focused on Ukraine once again, and obviously therefore focused on Russia. But the question is, do any of the member states have sufficient militaries in order to pursue the goals that the NATO summit seems to represent. Well, the UK Defence Journal, well, they published this article originally, I think earlier in the year, but I think it was January, but they were tweeting this out yesterday. Royal Navy has too few warships, says Minister. This is the Earl of Minto was talking about this earlier in the year. And of course, this is something that the UK column has been talking about for quite some time. The question is, why too few? And there are two main reasons. First of all, we don't need this metal work that we've had in the past because, of course, we pursue our geopolitical goals using proxies largely in Syria and Ukraine, everywhere proxies. We like to have other people fight and die on our behalf. But the other principle here that I want to mention is interdependence. We'll be talking about this more in future programs. But if you do a search on the UK Column website for interdependence and read the articles that are there that talk about this, this is a fundamental principle of globalism, and it's something that, of course, if you pursue it as a sovereign nation, it assumes that you don't have any independence, that you rely on everybody else, and of course you're therefore giving up some sovereignty in order to pursue that. Anyway, NATO all published this little graphic as well, just to give you an idea of how sort of interdependent we all are, because they're talking about the collaboration that's needed between the various countries, the various international organizations like the EU and the United Nations and so on. And so this contributes to our safety and our security. But of course, what we also see increasingly is interdependence with respect to narratives and no opposition within this organization and within the countries that are members of it and within the countries that are also aligned with it. So an extremely dangerous situation. We'll have more to talk about this next week when the NATO summit actually takes place. But just to let you know it's happening and we can imagine what comes after it. We'll be interested to see who Keir Starmer decides to send to it. And we got to leave it there for today. So I'm going to say thank you very much to Ben, to Debbie, and to Cheryl. We'll be back in a couple of minutes for some extra. Hope if you're not a UK Column member and you're not joining us for extra, hope you have a great weekend. And we'll see you as usual, 1 p.m. on Monday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.